in today's video, we are going to see how to append rich text comments in Power Apps when you use them with SharePoint. Now, this was a pretty straightforward affair in InfoPath because all you had to do is just drag and drop that control on your form in InfoPath, and it would create a repeating table that would not only show you or give you the box to enter new comments, but also a repeating table where it shows you the history of comments made on that specific field. I have come across different approaches that people have taken to achieve this in Power Apps because it's not as straightforward as how it used to be in InfoPath, and it's not an intrinsic feature of Power Apps to actually display the appended comments of a field that can actually retain versions. Some of the videos on YouTube that I have seen have shown an alternative trick where they use two columns, one column to store the number of comments made, and then very intelligently use the combination of different functions to achieve this. What I'm trying to show here in this video today is a different approach where I actually use a combination of Power Apps and PowerAutomate to achieve this specific feature. And the beauty of this method is once you have the PowerAutomate flow in place, that can be used with any Power Apps as long as you're in the same environment. Can be used for any number of fields, for any it is not tied to a single specific SharePoint list once that PowerAutomate flow is written completely. And before I jump into actually showing you the method of doing this, let me show you the approach that I'm trying to demonstrate here. So I have a SharePoint list where I will create a column that can retain versions. So a column that can have the append feature, and which is obviously going to be rich text field. And I'm going to try and modify the default template of the the form in Power Apps to have the history feature enabled, like how we do that in InfoPath. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to have Power Apps send a query to PowerAutomate with the URL of the site, the name of the list, the specific column for which I'm trying to achieve this feature, and the ID of the specific item for which I'm trying to display the data. And I'm going to send that to PowerAutomate, and PowerAutomate in turn will query the SharePoint list with this item ID to find out all the versions of that specific item. Okay, and then put that in an output variable, send it back to Power Apps, and then Power Apps displaying that in a nice HTML box. Okay, so what I'm trying to explain here is once you have this PowerAutomate flow in place, it can be used across SharePoint lists and Power Apps combinations. It's not just tied to a specific list or Power App, because we are making it generic by providing it all the information it needs, like the site URL, the list name, the column name. So this can be used across your site. With that, let me directly jump into the data entry form. I have used this form in my previous video as well. And before I go any further, this might be a long video, so I might have to break it down into two. If that happens, you will see the link to the second version or the second part of this video in the description box, and you can access it from there. So let's jump right into it. I have this list here. I'm just going to add a column of multi-line text, and I'm just going to call this comments 1. The reason I'm saying it comments 1 because I have been trying with other columns. I have already named a column called comments, so just to avoid any conflicts. And I'm going to use the enhanced rich text feature here, and I'll say append changes in the existing text, and I'll just save it. Yeah. So by default, you'll see that it shows this view entries thing here, but you'll not find any of those. Um, let's try and modify this in Power Apps. So because now if I click on this new button here, you will not see the comments one box here because we haven't configured it yet. So let me go here, open my Power Apps, and let it do its magic. I might have to fast forward this. All right. So now I'm just going to add the comments one field to my form here. And I'm gonna do a couple of things here. Or let me show you this first. So I have this field added to my form now. So I can happily publish this and go back to my SharePoint list, clear my cache. And now if I click on this new button here, okay, looks like the cache hasn't refreshed yet. Yeah, so now I can see this comments one here, right? So I'll say entry 5, let me select a state, whatever, and now I make a comment here. So I'll write some text here. Yeah, and I am going to save it. Now if I open it again, if I click on this edit thing here, it would show me the text I had written, but it would show me in a cryptic, it's HTML language, because you remember I have enabled it to have rich text features. So first let's take care of that. Let's not have a box that, you know, populates with all this gibberish that the end user would not understand. And let's have a clean empty box to show to the end user, and all the previous entries that or comments that were made to this box should appear down below here, which is precisely what we want to achieve in this video. So let me go back to Power Apps and let me so first thing I'm going to do is this comments one, this data card value 2 here, I'm going to change its default property to not show the parent or default. I would rather say just give me a blank box. So I'm going to unlock this card here, and in the default property of this data card value 2, I will just change it to just a blank field. Yeah, so when that happens and it hasn't made Power Apps unhappy, so I can happily publish this and go back. So what this would allow me to achieve in my form is, and let me refresh my cache here, what this will allow me to achieve in my form is, when next time when somebody edits this form, it's not going to give that cryptic, the field. It's only going to give me a clean box to type. So I will write something else here, and I'm going to save this. Yeah, okay, if I can spell it correctly. So I have been able to save it, and every time I edit, it's going to give me that clean box. So one problem solved, that every time I get a clean box for the user to enter. But I can't see the history of entries that were made in this specific box here, and that's what we want to achieve in this video. And we will do that. But first, I will try and explain the HTTP call that I'm making to SharePoint to get the versions of a specific item. So this specific item here, I think the ID should be 5. If my calculation is correct, the ID should be 5. So if I want to see all the versions of this specific entry right here, because I've like entered I have modified this specific item thrice, because every time I entered a comment in this comments one box, it created one version of this specific entry. So if I want to see all the versions or all the versions of this specific entry right here, the format that I am supposed to be following for the HTTP request is something like this. So let me first show you that. So this is my site name. I'm just going to write underscore. All right. What's me and misspelling today /web. Let's get by title data entry form, and I'm going to say I'm going to need the items here, and I am particularly interested in the item with ID 5, and I need all the versions of this specific item. So if I make this call to the site, a test flow in PowerAutomate, which I am going to trigger manually, and I am just going to call it test rest query, and I am going to create one. So all I'm going to do here is just make an HTTP call, send an HTTP request to SharePoint. The address of the site would be my site right here. Okay, it has identified it. It's going to be a get method, and I'm just going to put the rest of the URL here, and I'm just going to use one header, which is the accept header. Says yeah, so application /json, and I don't want any metadata, so I'll just write OData is equal to no metadata. Yeah, so this is going to be my HTTP call, and I will need to parse this, but before I parse, I need a JSON payload. So let me just save this once and try and run this specific flow that I created. It says my flow ran successfully. So this is my JSON output from the HTTP response, and I'm going to use this as a payload in the next step. So I'm just going to copy this, edit my flow again, add a new step, and I'll say parse JSON, and I'm going to use the body of this response as the content, and the schema, like I said, I'm going to generate that from the JSON payload that I just copied. So it created a schema based on that payload. Let me just save this and try and test it again. Okay, I'll perform the trigger action, run the flow, done. So now if you see, if you see the body of this, so it's giving me all the comments that I made in the comments one field. So I wrote something else here once, and then before that I had written, I had modified that field more than once. So I had written yeah, as you can see here, some text here. So all the versions of that item with ID 5 are in this JSON response, and I'm going to use this in my actual flow. But this was just a demonstration of what this action right here is. So I'm going to query the SharePoint list to give it to give me all the versions of a specific item, and then loop through that and do some fancy stuff. All right, so let's finish the Power Automate bit first. We've already seen the format or the concept behind using the HTTP call to get the versions of a specific item from a list. So let's finish this part. This app right here was just a demonstration of how we are going to parse the response that we get from the SharePoint site using the HTTP call. But this is not the actual flow. We are going to create a new flow which is going to take inputs from a PowerApps call, and it's going to churn that, find out the response that we want to find, and respond back with a variable. So let's finalize this bit here. So I'm going to create a new flow which will be triggered by PowerApps, and I will call it fetch history 2. And so the trigger for this specific flow is going to be PowerApps. And like how I explained in this diagram here, we are going to send the site URL, the list name, the column name, and the column ID for this to become like a generic Power Automate flow. So we'll have to, declare those variables first. So let's go ahead and do that. So first of all, I am going to need to declare the site URL. So I'll just say initialize a variable, and I'm going to call it site URL, which is going to be of string type. And in the value, in the dynamic content I'll select ask in PowerApps, which is going to create a variable name here, which I'll have to use in PowerApps when I'm trying to pass this parameter. So the name of this variable is initialize variable underscore value. Let me hover over this and show it to you. And I am going to apply the same method in initializing a couple of more variables. So I have the site URL, I need the list name, so I'll declare another variable called list name, and I'm going to say it's a string variable, and again I'm going to need this from PowerApps. This time the name of variable is initialize variable 2 underscore value. Let me repeat this step and create the column name variable, which is again going to be of a string type, and this also would come from PowerApps. Yep. And lastly, we need an ID column. So initialize variable, I'll say item ID, which is going to be of integer type, and I'm going to need this to be coming from PowerApps. Okay, so 4 variables declared here. If we want, we can rename the stages. I'll not do that here, but in an actual implementation, please rename the stages for it to make more sense. And lastly, what we are going to need is a variable that's going to store the output that we want to send back to PowerApps. So I'll initialize one more variable here, and I will call it append comment, which is going to be of string type, and I'll just write div class. What should be the class? should be React field header append data, and I will close this div. Yeah, so this is going to be the initial value of the append comment. This is the variable I'm going to send back to PowerApps. So now I've defined all my variables, all the parameters that I'm going to get from PowerApps, and all I need to do now is make that HTTP call to SharePoint. So yeah, and in the site address I am going to use the variable that I've already initialized. So I'll just click here, say enter custom value, and I'm going to use the initialize variable underscore value. If you remember, that's this variable right here. Okay, I could do that, or I could actually use the site URL itself. Yeah, that's the smarter way of doing it. So I'll use site URL here, and in the URI I would say underscore API slash web slash lists slash get by title, and within the single quotes I would need to give the list of name of the list. So I'll just use this variable list name, close this. And so if you remember the structure of this request URL, so it's going to say items, and then in that parenthesis I need to give the item ID. So again I'm going to use this variable that says item ID, and slash versions. Yeah, and header, just a single header called accept, which will be application slash JSON, and I need no metadata whatsoever. So I'll say no metadata. Okay, the next step would be to parse this. So I'll just say parse JSON, and I'm going to use the body of this HTTP call as an input here. And for the schema, let me actually take the schema from the other flow that I just demonstrated, so bear with me. So I just created test rest query. Let me click on edit here, and there's this payload here. Sorry, there's this sample here. Just copy this, go here, and the schema is going to remain the same. So now I have the JSON parsed, and once the JSON is parsed, all I need to do is the output of this I need to apply to each step, because there are going to be multiple objects in this in this array that is being returned. So I have to loop through the entire object to find or get what I need. So I'll just use this control. I'm just going to add and apply to each control, and the input of that would be the value field or the value output of the parse JSON step. So let me just type value here. Yeah, and so this bad boy right here would be the input to this apply to each, And the first thing I need to do is I need to format the date, uh, because with each comment that we have in the history field, we also need to show the date and time on which that specific comment was made. The response that we get in JSON, the date format is not proper. It's the international format, needs to be reformatted for it to look beautiful on the form. So I'm just going to use a compose step here, and in that compose I'm just going to take write an expression which is a format uh, date time expression. Okay, and the input is going to be the items that I'm getting from this apply to each. Yeah, so I'll just write items and another parenthesis here. Yeah, and within that I will write within quotes apply underscore to underscore each. Yeah, and apply to each basically refers to this, and then I have to actually point it to a specific column, which is the modified column. So I'll just say modified. Yeah, and so this is going to give me that modified date from my HTTP request that has been passed in the JSON, and I need to format that to an MMDDYY format, and I need the hour and the minute as well. Okay, so I have formatted the modified date in the way I need it, and then all I need to do is, you remember this variable we declared here, the variable called append comment. I just need to use an append to string variable step here, and just append to the append comment variable. Sorry for the pun there. So yeah, I need to append to this, and what I need to append is the out again an expression, and that expression is um, something like this. And I'm probably going to put that in the description box as well. But so that expression basically is this. Um, yeah. Okay, so what I'm basically doing is that I am concatenating with the previous value of this append comment variable, um, and I'm first putting a div statement declaring the margin between two consecutive uh, values of this variable, so that when I show the history, there's some gap between two rows. And again, I'm taking the input from the apply to each, uh, this loop here. Author is the person who actually made the change, and so this combination right here is going to give me the name of the person who's modified it. And then with a different color, that's why I've used a span tag here. The output of the compose section, so this compose is this section right here, will give me the time on which this specific modification was made. So I'm concatenating the name of the person who made the change and the time at which the change was made, and then I'm going to append that with the actual value of the column which stores the history. So I'm just going to take this expression, and I'm going to paste it here like this, and I just need to make sure that everything is working fine. So I'm concatenating this with this div items apply to each author, and then the lookup value of that. and I am also concatenating with a different color the outputs of the compose step, and finally the variable call name. Let me just quickly check what is the, so it's called call name, so which is fine. Yeah, so yeah, so this is okay. So now in this loop I have looped through each of the outputs, I mean the entire object that would have been returned by this, and I have picked up the fields that I needed. So I picked up the modified column, and then using this expression right here I have picked up the name of the person who made that change and the exact change or the exact comment that was made. All I need to do now is add another step which is going to be outside the apply to each, and this step will be where I actually respond back to PowerApps. So respond to PowerApp or flow. The output is going to be text output, and the name of that output should be, let's say, result, and I'll point this to my good friend append comment here. Yeah, so this kind of sums up my entire flow. So I'm taking input from PowerApps. I've declared some variables to store those values, and then I'm making a REST call, an HTTP call. I'm parsing that response, and then after the response is passed, I'm going through the entire object and picking up the values I need, putting them in a variable called append comment, and then responding to PowerApps with that append comment. Yeah, so let me just save this. And this is where I'm going to end my first part of the video. Please click in the link in the description box to see the second part of the video. Thank you.